Hello, my name is Sarah Littlefield and I work for the River Trust, which has been my passion for more than 10 years. Recently, our main problem in the Lune has been flooding. Storm Desmond hit the Lune worse than any other river in the country, and we had the highest QMEX at Crook of Lune in the whole of the United Kingdom. Many people say that the way forward is to build concrete walls to protect places like the industrial sites in Lancaster, the substations, communities at risk. We believe there's a different way. Natural flood management offers many benefits to habitat and environment, as well as to protect against flooding. We've been working recently in Roeburn alongside Rod Everett, whose ideas have already been tested and shown to be effective. 50 years ago, Wray suffered terribly with a huge flood, and the Roeburn was responsible for that.
And we could see across, and I've never seen a sky like that before or since. It was incredible. It was every shade of grey, whitish, black, even purple, and it was swirling. And we looked in awe, me and my workmates. And we thought, my God, and you would have thought that Thor himself and Odin were going to come out of that sky, or God's voice, and the heavens were going to open.
It appeared that the village was a brown lake with a few house roofs poking out of the top. And then I went round the spout towards the bridge, which had gone, and the noise was absolutely incredible. Boulders creating this huge noise.
It was up to the windowsill of these buildings, and they had to climb out through the back window to get out.
We could see the storm clouds brewing, that's why Mum said we had to turn back and we came back.
Talking about a
fireball,
fireball that went down the field, so that's sort of over that way, that went down the field, it hit a fence, and the whole fence lit up.
Yeah, and we were walking up the field in the water coming down over about that deep it was, walking up the field.
What was the fireball from?
Lightning.
Oh, right.
The amount of rainfall was around about 115 millimetres in 90 minutes.
What did that remember that?
4 or 5 inches.
So that's compared with Flood Desmond, that was 330 millimetres over 24 hours. But Flood Desmond in the Lune, the water that was coming out of the Lune from Flood Desmond was the fastest they've ever recorded from a river flow. And that was 41 Olympic swimming pools every minute. But these summer floods are much more damaging than a winter flood. Coming from the top of the cloud onto warm, dry ground. And that's it's like boiling, if you put water onto a hot plate, it runs off really quickly. And also the difference you get is you get cold water going into warm water. And cold water doesn't mix with warm water. So you actually get this flow where you get the two can't mix together. So you get, instead of going down in Flood Desmond, the water went down like that. So it flowed down the river, whereas in the Wray Flood, it was boiling. It was flowing across the river, and the two lots of water can't mix. Cold rainwater, it's heavier than the warm water, so it goes underneath it, and you get this sort of flow. So it actually acts like a barrier, and it holds the water back. So the water itself acts like a flood barrier, as well as the trees. So you get this sort of a totally different sort of flow. That's the allotment.
Oh.
And that's the river sort of just over from the allotment.
Yeah.
So that was cleaning up afterwards. And my brother used to come here to Ivan Hills to fish a lot before the flood. And he used to, when he was fishing, he'd always come back with sort of 8 to 10 brown trout. It was a completely different sort of fishing to after the flood. Frank Ibbotson, who's right up at the top, he used to go fishing, and he used to fish enough to feed everyone in the family, but also they used to salt the fish in a barrel, so there was enough fish to salt as well. So it's a completely different sort of fishing to the current fishing. And now I walked down the river last weekend and I saw 5 fish going from Barking Bridge down to River Roeburn scar.
Is that because the river's moving too fast now? Why are
Yes, there's all sorts of reasons why the fish aren't there. A lot of it's because of the damage to all the wetlands higher up the river, so they're not feeding the river. Because it comes up so quickly, you know, it's regularly coming up 1.5 meters in less than an hour. So that moves rocks. Some of the rocks that are moving sort of
scour all the insect life.
In Flood Desmond there were rocks about a ton that were moving down the river. In Wray Flood, some of the rocks, there's one size of a rock, and that's about 24 tons. But definitely there's rocks that we'll see which were about 12 tons that came down sort of 400 yards down the river, something like that. And that can kill everything in the river. I remember seeing big sea trout further up that had been killed by the flood.
But we used to catch lampreys, sticklebacks, bullheads by the bucket load in summer. That was what you'd do that all day. You'd fill a bucket with it. At the end of the day, you tip them back into the river, and you just couldn't go.
We don't really see any of those now. The only thing we really see is the sea trout coming up. There might be a few brown trout, but there's no eels, there's no sticklebacks. And all those are gone now. So that's a real, to me, it's a real shame with the river. And it's
the diversity is gone.
The kids have lost the ability to actually be able to see those and catch those now.
Yeah.
So that's a whole generation that now hasn't got that.
After the flood, of course, we didn't see the otters again, and just beyond the bluff there, where you can see the debris was massive, and a lot of accumulation of debris. And in amongst all the debris, of course, there were items of furniture and massive amounts of trees and so on. But we did see quite a lot of dead animals. The weather had soon picked up again, and it was still baking hot, so that wasn't helping with the carcasses that were lying around. And the smell of the whole place was absolutely rank. You have rotting vegetation and rotting animals, and it seemed almost apocalyptic when we got down there.
In the 2012 flood, that all got washed out, and there was a tree on the end here, a beech tree on the end, and the flood had started about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the water, but it got strongest just after midnight. And Lawrence just lives down here. He was standing behind the tree, and the tree started shaking, and his son sort of rushed back here onto the bridge. And Lawrence took his time about going, and then by the time he got back to the bridge, the tree had gone into it. So he was a few seconds away from getting drowned. There were lots of conifer trees here. They all went with the flood. And the other thing that got affected here was the red squirrel. The red squirrel really liked the conifers there. We used to see red squirrels all the time along this area. And it was, they didn't die out until about 1980, but it certainly had a big impact on them here. The whole of this was covered in boulders, so there wasn't a tree in sight after the flood. It was a completely different view to.
Amazing how it comes back again, isn't it?
That's the sort of thing that the river shifted.
Right now, yeah.
In the highest floods, it would flood onto this side. So it would just slow it down that little bit. They've done a lot of work with just putting wooden check dams across areas that will flood, and that again just holds it back a little bit. The more you can hold it back, and what they're aiming for in Slovakia, where they're working, is they've actually ended up with a situation where I think it's 800 communities now have put in measures to slow the flow, and they're actually saying that the climate is starting to change again. So the water table is rising, they're getting more evaporation from the trees and from the land, so the dry areas of the country are now getting rain. So it's actually it's making a big difference to the whole country by changing the water flow. And here, one of our big problems here is actually the water table's dropping. We're getting lots of rain, and the rain comes off the tops very quickly. It goes through the middle part of the river slower than it used to. So it's speeded up at the top, it's slowed down in the middle. But if we can actually slow down the top bit, that's really what we need to do in the future. In this area down here, there's a possibility that it could be one of the areas that we could allow to flood and slow the water down by allowing the area to flood away from the river. There's another area we've identified further up where we can possibly do it. So it needs, and it's one of the things the government's very keen on doing at the moment, is actually seeing if you can get farmland that can be flooded. In those, it might be one day in 10 years, but that's all you need. It's that one extreme flood that needs to be protected from. So that's really what we're looking at.
With the Wray Flood, was the people expecting something difficult to happen?
No, it was
a beautiful day.
Yeah, it was just the time.
It was a beautiful day that morning.
Yeah, and that's probably why it was so damaging, because it was a sort of beautiful hot weather, and then that changed with the cold water that caused the damage.
How much do you feel that the damage that it did is human related?
I can go on to that now.
Okay.
It's good timing. It's sometime, one person says 1947, another bit is 1952. So somewhere around that there was a big fire that went right across here. So to Mallardale Pike. Didn't quite get to the top of Mallardale Pike, because you can see the heather on the top of Mallardale Pike is intact. But this stream here, Colross Beck, was one particular point where the flood water just ran off. The peat had gone, grasses had come into that area, and the sheep, you look at an aerial photograph of it, this area is covered in sheep. There's hardly any sheep on here. And so the sheep are concentrating on that area and keeping the grazing down, and sort of grazing it right down so the flood water can come off very quickly. So there was a big scar. These lines here are the scars from Wray Flood. So that's one place that it was a problem. Up here, I'm not sure where it is, somewhere up here there's a whole lot of drainage grips that were put in the 1950s as a sort of war effort to try and increase the grazing. So there were some up here, there's some up here, there was some on just a bit further over there. So what I'm trying to do now is to see if we can identify all the little, like this area coming to Deep Clew. It runs off this area here, so there's a rapid runoff there that comes right down the track, and it does that regularly.
Is that the track that Royston put in?
Yeah. So it's that sort of trying to understand what those events are. And there's Barking Gate here, but there's just there's a little stream, this stream here, that floods badly. But it used to be 20 years ago there were eels in the top of that. There was a sort of wetland area where the eels were. So that's another change. You lose the wetlands. There's a wetland right up, just right at the top here. There's the only real wetland that's left in Robindale. But to me, in the past, all of this top would have been a lot of wetlands that would have held the water back, slowed it down, and it can't do that anymore.
And is that due to gripping, or is it?
It's due to gripping and it's due to overgrazing. So subsidies for drainage grips, subsidies for sheep. Now they're bringing subsidies for slow the flow. So finally they're getting there. There's a little stream that comes down the side of the road here, and you can see that it's only about that wide, but it's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. So that just small little check dam in that holds the water back will just slow that for 2 hours before it hits the river, and then it's going to help.
So you're spreading the weight of it, basically.
Yeah, the idea is to slow, spread and sink. So all the time, the more you can slow it and you can spread it out so it sinks into the ground, and then it goes back into the water table.
So we started building check dams a few weeks ago here to reduce the flow of water down into the river and onto the farm when we do get heavy rains. One of them we built is this, which is based on a Slovakian design we found online, and apparently it's meant to be one of the most useful ones they've found through their experiences with it. I think one of the reasons for that is that these branches here, once they are damaged by water, you can easily replace the parts of it, and all of the bits from it come from the same tree as well on the farm, so you really get to use every single bit when you do cut down a tree for it, which is ideal if we're dragging it up here where there isn't a lot of conifers to do that with. I think it maybe took us 2 or 3 hours to do something like this, and we'd never done it before, so it's very simple to do, really just sinking in these bigger ones here, but still allowing water normally to flow through it. So in normal conditions like we have today, the water's not disturbed at all, it still flows through normally. And then we laid that one in and put these branches in between, and they're wedged then again with this other log on top, and that keeps it all in place. So even if you do get really bad weather, it'll lock it all in place and really cause a lot of disruption to the water flow, and eventually lead it off down these two here onto the fell and diverting it away, especially away from our track, so we can still drive up and down in the winter, but to keep this area wet and moist rather than just letting it all rush down. This check dam is built about 30 metres downstream from the Slovakian designed one. It's a slightly more simple design, I feel. It's just 3 logs stacked on top of each other, starting with the narrowest at the bottom and then getting wider as it comes up in a V shape. I think this one took us about 2 hours between 3 of us to do. Again, it's dug into the ground to begin with and secured in posts with wire again to hold it in place in bad weather.
What we've done is turn those rocks around and put them so they come out from the bank, come upstream, and then the water that comes through them, between them, gets pushed into the centre of the river. And you can see this with the white foam that's coming through, the distinct lines are pushing it into the river centre. So even when these rocks are buried deep in the river, this flow will still happen underneath and will still cause the river to deepen towards the centre of the river. This is an area of blanket bog here. We've got the heathers, the bilberry, and further down cranberry. And the cranberry's got the red berries just coming now. And the most important part here is this big clump of sphagnum moss. And the sphagnum moss really holds a lot of moisture. Something like 70% of the volume of this can be water. So this clump here might be able to hold 100 litres or so of water. So that's a big amount that's stopped from going off and flooding down the valleys. Also with this, the water gets cooler inside. So inside here it's much cooler. You can see it's got a great big hole you can go down in. And in there it's much cooler. And if you can get towards 4 degrees temperature, then it will sink more into the earth. So that all helps slow the flow. The other important thing with slowing the flow here is the roughness of the ground. So if you can imagine, with a lot of water on here, so we've had up to 120 millimetres within less than an hour on this area. So you can just imagine a big amount of water landing here, and this roughness holds it and allows it to sink in. and that's important for the village, which is just down from here. And we've got the village of Wray, which got flooded in 1967. We've got Hornby, which got flooded at the same time. And we've also got Fulton nearby, so those all got badly flooded. And one of the big sources of that, I think, was where the blanket bog got damaged. It might have got damaged with fire, it might have got damaged with putting drainage grips in, or with overgrazing. So those are all reasons why we might have lost some of the blanket bog. In other areas, the blanket bog is suffering a lot from acid rain, particularly in Derbyshire. But in this area, we haven't really get the same amount of acid rain. This area here is an area of blanket bog that's been grazed lightly for about 10 years now, so it's allowed the heathers to come back and the mosses to come back. Over the fence we've got an area that's more heavily grazed. This is a damaged area of blanket bog. Here you can see the peat is now bare, so in heavy rain the peat will wash off here, and this has no holding capacity. So in heavy rain the runoff is very fast from this sort of area. So this is a sort of area that's really important to try and get the roughness back into it, to get the heathers coming back, to get the big clumps of sphagnum moss coming into this sort of area to hold the water in the landscape. This erosion in front of us, Warmbeck, this has been here since the Wray Flood, so 1967 it was developed to that stage. This is similar to where in the distance, next to Malladale Head, to the right hand side of that, there's a whole area that was burnt in a fire, probably in the 1947 from what I can gather. And that area, the heather was damaged, the blanket bog was damaged, so there's much faster runoff from there. And deep in Colrosbeck, which is one of the deep valleys that run up there, there's erosion and a deep gully that's over 20 foot deep, and that's still actively eroding all the time. And just next to it, above that, there's still bare areas that will erode and the banks will fall away. So an area that needs working on. This is also an area that the Abbeystead estate are keen to work on.
These swells have been dug here to collect a lot of the rainfall in really extreme weather conditions. Rather than being in streams, spreads them out along a much bigger surface so they soak into the ground, and also provides a lot of water for these trees that we've been planting with it. There's ash and holly and willow and alder, which in the future will also be shade and shelter for the sheep which will graze up here. So it offers a lot of benefits to the wildlife as well as to slow the flow.
We are now looking for more landowners and farmers to work alongside us to protect our communities at risk, and by working on their fields, their rivers upstream, we can protect the downstream communities. Actions we're interested in are leaky dams, fencing off rivers, creating woodlands, ponds, scrapes, wetlands. All these together can do tremendously well at slowing the flow overall and protecting properties and businesses from flooding. And here on Roeburn is a very good example. The work that Rod Everett has been doing here has been excellent and has shown the way for many types of intervention which can work. We're targeting 5 communities at risk, and round here the community at risk is Bentham and Lancaster. So we're looking at upstream of both, and that's why we're working in these areas. Rod has shown us the way. We're really looking forward to working together more. We love to be involved with the community, and Rod has done lots of that, and we have a community engagement officer who works with lots of people too.
I mean, I spend quite a lot of time here, and especially next to the river or in the river, and I find when you spend such a long time just in one spot making one thing, you notice changes in the river far more than you would otherwise. But what's so interesting about it for me is that noticing, even with it raining hard, the river level comes up imperceptibly, slowly up, you know, but you start to see it, and you start to really commune with the river. You start to see, you know, spending one place, you start to recognise the stones and the rocks in certain places. You come back the next week and you see that they've moved 2 yards down the bank, or when it's sunny. I mean, today, that rock there, I think I put some of these in for me to stand on to reach, and you know, I've noticed the river level's probably gone down maybe 6 to 8 inches. So this is really what it's all about. It isn't about making this. I mean, yes, of course, it's nice for people to see it, but really it's about that sort of meditative time spent with the river, and you really start to notice things.